Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be doing another book review on a rather recent release. So today we're going to be talking about Fairest Flesh by K.P. Kulski. This came out, I believe, in September of 2020. I received it in my December 2020 Nightworms package. I have a whole video on Nightworms and everything that is. I will link that down below for y'all if you're interested. But yeah, let's just dive into this book. So this guy is about 219 pages, I think. Yeah, 219 pages. And it tells the story, well, the premise is a look at the life of Elizabeth Bathory, also known as Elizabeth Bathory, also known as the Blood Countess, who was a real Hungarian countess, an actual historical figure, who is known for being one of the most horrific mass murderers in all of history, ever. She's a very interesting character. She's potentially an inspiration for vampires and Dracula, except she is very, very, very real. So this is supposed to be a fictional retelling of her life. I'll quickly read the back of the book. So it says, in 16th century Hungary, there is a story about rage and powerlessness, of beauty and death, a story that not only belongs to the Countess Elizabeth Bathory, but to everyone. Hoping to leave behind a lonely and abusive childhood, the witch Dorothea sets out to find a new life outside of her solitary woods. Habsburg emperors play puppet of the Hungarian nobles, while the Ottoman sultans encroach ever closer. War and cruelty are ways of life. Women borrow power with their youth and desirability, like nobility and riches, a waning commodity that only some are lucky to have. Unable to escape the memory of her dead mother, Dorothea discovers a new voice that promises her everything she's ever wanted. With the falling sickness worsening, Lady Bathory becomes desperate for power over her own life, crashing headlong into rages and violent outlets. Pretty castlemaids go missing, leaving behind collections of blood-soaked linens. As years pass, all of Savar town knows that the castle overlooking their homes is a place that swallows the lives of young women. Even the beautiful Anna knows that, but she has a secret and a deep need to find out the truth. So when I got this, I was extremely excited to read this. I'm very into serial killers, as creepy as that sounds, and true crime. So this being kind of a medieval setting, along with a horror fiction retelling of that, really, really spoke to me. I'm just gonna bluntly say it. I was completely underwhelmed with this novel. I guess things that we should know that make it kind of relevant right now is it was just recently nominated for a Bram Stoker Award. I believe it was nominated for the short fiction, which isn't short stories, it's like novellas and like shorter books, but it was just nominated for a Bram Stoker Award, which really, really caught me off guard. And it has a lot of praise from writers like Paul Tremblay, who I adore. Paul Tremblay is even on the cover and says, as brutally horrifying as it is mesmeric, consider me a K.P. Kulski fan for life, which is his take after reading this book. But there are quite a lot of problems with this novel. So I'd say my biggest problem when diving into this is where Kulski, and I'm sorry if I say that wrong, derives her horror from. There really should be a trigger warning on this book because it talks so much about pedophilia and rape and incest. It's almost overwhelming. It's only a 219-page book, but those topics show up again and again and again. And for me, that's something that I am not necessarily interested in reading about when I go to read a horror, especially when the rape and the incest and the pedophilia could potentially be completely made up for the novel. It's not like we're really diving into what the Blood Countess did, or if those storylines really have anything to do with her at all, because they really don't. So instead of focusing on a historically accurate account of a murderess who killed hundreds of people, supposedly, Kulski decided to give these characters that are minor characters, turn them into major characters, and talk about these kind of grotesque things that didn't do much to add to any part of the history or really to the story at all. And on top of that, she wanted you to feel sympathy for a rapist, for a pedophile, for somebody willingly engaging in incest, and all three of those are different characters. And all three of them, for the first 2/3 of the book, are our main characters. They're who we're supposed to be focusing on. And feeling sympathy for those types of people, and maybe Kulski's saying, like, this is a negative world, and they could be much worse. They could be the horrible murderess that is Elizabeth, but she doesn't really do that, because throughout the book, we don't know anything about Elizabeth of Bathory. That was so disappointing to me, because she is such an interesting figure, but we meet her as a 14-year-old girl, and you think you're going to get a real story arc out of her, but you kind of don't. You meet her, and she's kind of evil, and then she just kind of stays that way. She doesn't do much except put things into motion, but she has no character arc whatsoever. And that kind of becomes a trend throughout this novel. We have, again, 3 other main characters who feel extremely dislikable for what they do, and then are extremely one-dimensional. They really are just these, like, one-trick ponies. Throughout the whole novel, it's like, this is their flaw, this is how they dealt with it, and this is how it pushed the plot forward. And to me, that just was like reading about awful people who were then talking about working for awful people. So there was just nothing I could really connect to for the first 2/3 of the book, and it put so much fictionalization. It took too many liberties with putting thoughts and ideas into these side characters of history that I just knew it was pretty much fiction the whole time, and it didn't add anything to the story that I already know. And then when we finally do get some morally decent characters, they're either like completely seldom seen and maybe show up and have like 3 talking lines, or they don't show up until 2/3 of the way through, and then continue with Kulski's scheme of like being a one-dimensional character, this like one-trick pony. They have one purpose to serve the plot, and we get nothing beyond that. These are some of the most shallow characters I have ever read in my entire life. So clearly wasn't a fan of connecting with any of the characters. There weren't even like anti-heroes or people that were villains like Iago that I kind of wanted to root for anyway, because like their motives made sense to me. Like there was none of that. There were literally like no motives for any of these characters. They were just horrible characters doing horrible things, or good characters doing good things, and nothing in between. And then on top of that, Kulski decides to make this like a really weird parallel to Snow White. Throughout the whole thing, there's this undertone of like the witch and like the mirror on the wall and being the fairest in the land and poison apples over and over and over again. It's just weaved throughout there. And that would have been really, really cool if this historical account actually inspired, I believe it was the Brothers Grimm who wrote Snow White. If they had actually taken inspiration from this historical tale, that would have been really cool to have a fictionalized tribute to Snow White, like kind of circle back in here. But that's just not where the Brothers Grimm got the inspiration for Snow White from at all. Because trust me, I googled it because it was so heavily shoved down my throat that this was a parallel to Snow White that I wanted to see if it was actually related, and it's not. There's absolutely nothing to do with Snow White and Elizabeth Bathory outside of this book, as far as I can tell. And that made it feel really cheesy and really corny. Like, it felt so forced, of like the poison apple, right, and the fairest in the land. Like, what? Like, and just there was no reason for it, and the evil witch, and it was just so thrown in your face, and I hated it. I hated every single second of all the Snow White parallels, and there's a lot. There's quite a lot. And then on top of that, I think I touched on this earlier, this novel doesn't really do much of anything to touch on Elizabeth's life. We see her briefly as a teenager for I'd say about a year into her life, and then the novel fast forwards into her reign as Countess. But when that happens, she becomes very much a side character. And I really wanted more from her because I was reading this novel to learn about her and to get like a fictional retelling of what was going on in her head and how she became who she was. But if that's what you're looking for in this novel, don't read this, because that is not what this is. Like, at all. This is maybe an outline for a draft of a book that could have been like 400, 500 pages, and created this, but you would also have to put more tales of Elizabeth in here, as well as, you know, some kind of characterization of your main characters, because this is literally just an outline of an idea. And to be perfectly honest, I can't believe it was nominated for a Bram Stoker Award, because this book to me was so frustrating and difficult to get through. And then just to continue to go off of that, I'm not really sure who the main character is in this book. There's a large portion of the book that kind of highlights a villain as a main character, who is flanked by two equally awful side characters who benefit her throughout the novel. And then on the last third of the book, we are introduced to a completely out of the blue character who just kind of is conveniently popped up there, and then the story is told for the rest of the time through her eyes for some reason. And the perspective switch and the focus and just all of it was just too much for me, and I was being kind of dragged back and forth between who I should care about, and the whole time I just wanted to care about Elizabeth. Shocker, she's not the main character. That I didn't care. And I only finished this book because it was so damn short. Had it been 100 pages longer, I would have DNF'd this. I came very close to DNFing it. There's just very little substance in here. Like I said, this feels like a draft. It feels like an idea, a really cool concept, but wasn't executed properly or fully. I feel like had it been longer, I would have been more interested in reading this. Had it had more historical accounts of Elizabeth as the Countess and why she did the things that she did, I would have really, really appreciated this novel. But since just none of that was in there, it really fell flat for me. The ending is infuriating. It is really out of the blue. Again, it gets super Snow Whitey for like no reason. I highly doubt any of it was historically accurate. And then it just kind of ends, and you have no real satisfaction for what happened to the characters. But if you go into like the author's note at the end, it's like, and then in history, this is what happened. You know, so she kind of like took like the cheap way out. Like she has this, what I'm sure she believes is a dramatic and satisfying ending. And I don't want to hate on Kulski too much, but the fact that I had to read the author's note and be like, oh, okay, is like a real issue for me. Like, end your novel in a satisfying way. I do think that you should always read the author's notes. I think that they write those for a reason, but the author's note shouldn't explain what actually happens at the end of your book. Except for Paul Tremblay's Cabin at the End of the World. That is the only exception. Read that book and you will see why. But this is not that exception. This is just, to me, lazy writing. It really did feel to me like she wrote this to get it out, didn't go through and fine-tune it, and just left it. And the reason I can say that too is because the amount of typos that made it through in this novel was nauseating. Like, I read The Stand, and it was just 1,200 pages long, and there was like 2 typos in it. And I had an edition from like 1992. Okay, this is 219 pages and had typos like every 6 pages. Or like extra words that just weren't deleted. So like, where was the editor? I don't know. This book really infuriated me. It is a 2 out of 5 stars. I have a slightly, I guess, less in-depth review on my Instagram page as well as my Goodreads. I'm sure my Goodreads I think has a few spoilers in there. I tried to keep as many spoilers out of this as possible, so feel free to check that out if you have read this novel. But yeah, I do not think I will be picking up anything else by Kulski in the future. This was such a letdown for me, especially on a subject matter that I was intrigued to read about. And it's a beautiful cover, it's a beautiful book, but it's just not pretty on the inside, unfortunately. But yeah, so that is all that I have for you guys on that. I will have my monthly wrap-up coming up really soon. That'll probably be my next video for all the books that I've read in January. I just uploaded a video on where I got this cute little hoodie. I will throw that up in the cards as well. And thank you guys so much for watching. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please like and hit that subscribe button down below, and I will catch you guys in the next one.